Sirens' headlines doom scroll our age runs hot. Therefore, we hunt for anything that cools the burn. But most fixes are just more noise with better branding. You feel it in your bones, the sense that life is speeding while meaning thins. Meetings multiply. Notifications nag. Outrage is a free refill. We are long on information and short on quiet. In a world on fire, what does a faithful life even look like? Across the centuries, a whisper pushes through the static. Not a spectacle, not a trend. A sentence tucked inside a genealogy where names pass like mile markers until one name makes the drumbeat stop. Enoch. Genesis says he walked with God, and then astonishingly, he was not, for God took him. Genesis 5:24. Therefore, a different way of being human exists. But mystery warns us not to turn it into clickbait. We're promised a payoff if we stay. What Enoch did then can be translated into our now. Start with the tension everyone in that chapter lives. Fathers, children, and dies. The refrain is so steady you can tap your finger to it. Therefore, death sounds like the metronome of reality. But Enoch's line breaks the song. He doesn't exit by the usual door. Hebrews later adds the frame Enoch was commended for pleasing God, and he was taken so that he did not see death, because whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Heb 11:5-6. Therefore, the core of Enoch's life wasn't spectacle. It was seeking. Not stunts nearness. Now zoom out. The world Enoch walked in was not serene. Early cities were rising. Violence was scaling. Lifespans were long, which meant people could postpone obedience for decades. Therefore, drifting felt safe. But delay becomes direction. Enoch becomes a holy interruption, proof that intimacy with God is possible in an age trending the other way. If he could walk with God, then you can walk with God now. Commute, calendar, inbox, and all. But walk is a verb, not a vibe. It suggests pace, direction, presence. Think about walking with a dear friend through a crowded street. You match steps. You listen more than you perform. You notice what they notice. Therefore, anxiety loosens because you're not sprinting alone. But if you push ahead or lag behind, the conversation thins. Enoch's secret is not secret at all. It is ordinary faithfulness repeated so consistently that it becomes extraordinary. He learned to aim his ordinary days at God's presence. Maybe you protest beautiful idea, impossible schedule. Fair. Our calendars are carnivores. But the point of this series is not to add guilt to your to-do list. It's to give you a map. Enoch's story is short on detail, which is a gift. Therefore, we're invited to build a practical field guide from the Bible's own themes. But we must keep it cross-denominational and clear. We'll resist speculation and avoid turning non-canonical literature into doctrine. We'll focus on what all major traditions can affirm: faith that seeks God, justice that loves neighbors, humility that walks the pace of mercy. 6:8. Here's the promise of the next hour. You'll see the world Enoch faced, understand what walked with God means in Scripture's own language, and leave with tiny repeatable practices that fit inside modern life without turning you into a monk or a machine. We'll slow down at the turning points, the birth of his son, the developing intimacy, the moment God took him, and speed through speculation that doesn't serve your soul. Therefore, you'll keep curiosity and gain clarity. But you'll also feel invited, not shamed, into a different cadence. Picture this. You step off the treadmill of hurry and fall in beside someone who knows the way home. City noise keeps roaring, but your steps start matching a wiser stride. You don't become less human. You become more. Your meetings still exist, but your motive shifts from performance to presence. Your phone still buzzes, but you decide when to listen. Your family still needs you, and now you arrive as a person who is already accompanied. Therefore, hope is not postponable until retirement, but it is practicable by dinner time. That is why Enoch matters now. His life is a quiet miracle, intimacy stronger than death. In a culture obsessed with what trends, he models what lasts. In a climate of heat, he embodies a cool, steady nearness. And in a world convinced that only the spectacular counts, he offers a different arithmetic, one faithful step repeated until God writes a different end to the story. Keep walking, we'll show you how. In a world on fire, Enoch's life whispers a map, match God's presence, direction, and pace in your ordinary day. And let quiet faithfulness do what hurry never can. Imagine the hum of new cities. Brick kilns, hissing bronze, cooling songs rising from courtyards, where power is measured in herds, sons, and weapons. Innovation moves like a river. Therefore, life gets faster and louder. But faster isn't the same as better. Genesis hints that violence began to scale with the tools to amplify it. See Gen 6:11. When your neighbor can forge iron, your anger can travel farther. When clans form grudges, get banners. When lifespans stretch across centuries, people learn the art of postponing repentance. There's time, they say. There's always time until there isn't. Think of Cain's line, building a city, Gen 4:17, the proud song of Lamech, 77-fold vengeance, set to a drum beat, Gen 4:23-24. Therefore, swagger becomes culture. But swagger needs an audience, and audiences need a spectacle. The spectacle becomes normal, a market where fear sells a gate, where the strong set prices with their fists. Weddings, harvests, festivals, ordinary joys survive. Yet underneath, resentment hums like a generator. People marry, trade, and laugh. But their moral imaginations shrink until might looks like right, and right looks naive. In that imagination shrink worship phrase, rituals still happen, incense burns, altars, smoke, but the center wobbles. Therefore, religion becomes useful when it blesses our plans. But it feels constricting when it asks us to love enemies or limit appetites. Think of the long arc of a 700-year life with no external deadlines. You can always change later. You can always reconcile later. You can always return later. Delay feels safe, which is why the text's drumbeat, "and he died," hits like a slow thunder. The metronome finally lands, and the myth of endless tomorrows dissolves. We should not cartoon the world before the flood as only monsters and chaos. It's closer to your city than you think. Commerce, craftsmanship, music, family. Therefore, life is recognizable. But recognition can be the trap that lulls us into thinking it's fine. Violence does not need a coliseum to bloom. It grows in the soil of contempt, gossip, exploitation, and clever justifications. Genesis compresses centuries into sentences, and in that compression, you hear the pressure of a culture trending away from God. Crowded, talented, successful, and spiritually unmoored, Gen 6:15. Now place one household in the middle of that. A young man becomes a husband, then a father. He learns the paths between markets and fields, the way shadows stretch across the street at late afternoon, the names of neighbors who loud talk their grudges. He hears the jokes at the gate that make cruelty sound clever. Therefore, conformity is easy, even rewarded. But conscience still flickers. Somewhere in that ordinary mix, a man named Enoch chooses to walk with God. The choice does not happen at a revival tent. It happens in the commute between work and home, in what he does with power when he has it, in how he speaks when he is slighted. The text never tells us that Enoch withdrew from the world. Walking with God is not a synonym for withdrawal. It is a pace, a presence, a direction inside the city's noise. Therefore, Enoch becomes a contradiction, fully present in his generation, yet stubbornly aligned to another cadence. His righteousness is not a performance. It's a practiced loyalty. He learns to say no to the adrenaline rush of outrage, so he can say yes to the slow strength of mercy. He learns to let the long span of his life become a long obedience, not a long procrastination. This is where our world mirrors his. We carry tools that amplify both good and harm. Our timelines lengthen with medicine and our reach expands with technology. Therefore, we assume we can fix what we damage later. But some damage calcifies habits, become character. Character becomes culture. Enoch's age teaches the danger of delay, the belief that we can always repent tomorrow. Tomorrow is a wonderful idea that often never arrives. And yet inside that hazard hope. The story does not say no one can walk with God. It quietly shows one who did. Therefore, possibility is planted like a seed. But seeds need soil. The soil is not isolation, it's daily life re-aimed. Markets still open, songs still play, bronze still gleams on the anvil, and a man takes those same roads at a different pace. That is the Antediluvian backdrop, not a fantasy world, but our world with longer shadows. Into those shadows walks Enoch, carrying a nearness that makes the dark less inevitable. The pre-flood world wasn't just chaos, it was ordinary life, tilted toward violence and delay. Enoch's walk shows how to live a different pace and presence inside a loud, talented, tempted culture. Open Genesis 5, and you can feel the rhythm before you finish the first line. Name years, sons and daughters, more years, and he died. Therefore the chapter moves like a drum, steady, inevitable. But halfway through the drum hiccups. Enoch. The pattern breaks. Instead of the metronome of mortality, the text gives us a different cadence. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. The sentence is short, the implications are endless. Genealogies are the Bible's way of saying ordinary lives matter. They're not filler, they're infrastructure. Each name is a house with dishes to wash fields, to weed jokes told at gates, losses buried under cairns of stones. Therefore, a genealogy lulls you into the realism of regular life. But the Enoch interruption wakes you with wonder. Why does this man receive commentary when most receive only a lifespan? The writer is not padding word count, he's ringing a bell. Pay attention. In a chapter where death punctuates every paragraph, one line ends without a period. Think of reading a spreadsheet where every row ends the same until one cell glows and the formula turns out different. You scroll back to see if you misread. You didn't. Something happened in this life that altered the usual closing sentence. Was Enoch stronger? No text says that. Was he a celebrity? We are told almost nothing about fame. The only verb the writer refuses to let go of is walked, not ran, not achieved, walked. Therefore, the key is not speed or spectacle, but sustained proximity. Walked with God is an image of companionship. If you've ever walked with someone you love through a city at dusk, you know the subtle choreography, the unhurried pace, the instinct to point out what delights the other, the quiet that doesn't require performance. Therefore, to walk with God is to let His presence set your stride. But presence without trust turns stiff and scripted. That is why Hebrews later reads Enoch as a portrait of faith that pleases God because he believed God exists and rewards those who seek Him. The reward, first of all, is God Himself. The pause in the genealogy also carries a warning wrapped in a promise. The warning, long life without God, still ends in the same sentence. The promise, ordinary life with God, can alter the sentence. Enoch becomes proof that intimacy is not reserved for temple mountaintops or ecstatic visions. It can be born in the commute, at the workbench next to a cradle. If this man's calendar work family neighbors could house a walk, then our calendars can too. Therefore, the interruption is invitation. But invitations can be ignored by those who prefer the drum. Notice what the text does not feed curiosity for mechanics. How exactly was he taken? At what hour? Were there witnesses? The writer gives no camera angles. Therefore, the emphasis refuses to slide toward spectacle. But in our age, spectacle is addictive. We want blueprints for the exit instead of a map for the walk. The scripture chooses the opposite. It barely sketches the exit to spotlight the walk. The miracle is not the vanishing. It's the nearness that made vanishing a mercy, not a theft. There is also a pastoral kindness in the placement of Enoch's line. It lands between the boasts of Lamech and the grief that will crescendo toward the flood. In a rising storm of violence and postponement, this sentence stands like a lamppost. It is possible to move differently here. Therefore, the genealogy does more than track bloodlines. It tracks choices. Each generation inherits rhythms, but no generation is locked inside them. Enoch shows that patterns can be interrupted from the inside out, one step then another, repeated over decades. So what should we do with the pause? First, let it interrogate your assumptions about significance. If God's word pauses for a walker, not a conqueror, then greatness may be measured in proximity, not publicity. Second, let it recalibrate time. If lifespans invite delay, then walking is how you spend time without wasting it showing up daily, not sprinting episodically. Third, let it reset desire. Enoch is commended not for using God, but for seeking God. The difference is everything one treats God as a tool. The other treats him as the treasure. Back to the drumbeat. And he died is still the normal rhythm for the chapter. Death remains universal. But Enoch's line does something to your hearing. The beat is not final, it's provisional under a larger music. Therefore, hope sneaks into the genealogy, but hope is not naive. It does not deny mortality. It declares that communion can carry a person beyond it in God's timing and God's way. You don't need to engineer your exit. You are invited to attend to your walk. Imagine the chapter read aloud in a crowded room. People nod as the cadence rolls. Then the reader slows, lifts his eyes, and lets the pause sit in the air, a heartbeat longer than comfortable. That silence is the Enoch effect. It names a possibility that threatens our resignation. It says in a world where death writes the expected sentence, a life of nearness can change the punctuation. Not everyone will want that. But if you do, the rest of this journey is a field guide to choosing the walk over the drum. Enoch's line breaks the genealogy's rhythm to teach this greatness is measured in nearness, not noise. Don't chase the exit. Choose the walk-pace presence direction until God writes the ending. Sometimes God changes your pace by putting a sleeping miracle in your arms. Enoch is 65 when Methuselah is born, Genealogy 5:21. Therefore, days that once blurred become counted in feedings and first steps. But counted days can still drift if they aren't aimed. Fatherhood doesn't make a saint by itself. It gives you a mirror. In the mirror, Enoch begins to notice his reflexes, how quickly he reaches for control, how easily he postpones prayer. He sees his son's eyes and senses a future that will inherit his habits. So he decides to walk deliberately, not dramatically. Picture a dawn in a small courtyard. The city breathes awake, a kiln sighs. Hooves clatter past the gate, neighbors barter. Enoch cradles Methuselah and prays in plain language. No stage, no incense, just a father naming his weakness and God's goodness. Therefore the day starts oriented. But orientation must survive interruptions. A tool breaks. A buyer haggles unfairly. A rumor about Enoch's family floats at the gate. Each disruption is a fork in the road. Match the velocity of frustration or match the pace of the one you're walking with. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah, Genealogy 5:22. The line is simple, the shift profound. Fatherhood becomes formation. The baby forces margins into a schedule that once sprawled. Therefore, Enoch learns the gospel of small pockets of time. But small pockets can be squandered by distraction. He chooses thresholds to anchor his walk. First touch of the doorframe, gratitude. First coin earned, justice. First conflict, mercy. These are micro-liturgies, tiny repeatable moves that braid presence into an ordinary day. At work, he slows just enough to ask, "What is the just weight here?" In conversation, he chooses clean truth over clever spin. In quiet, he lets anxiety rise and fall without obeying it, naming it before God instead. Therefore, trust begins to feel like muscle memory. But muscle memory requires repetitions, not resolutions. He repeats the walk when he is tired, when he is misunderstood, when the city celebrates Lamech-style swagger and his gentleness looks weak. There's a cost. Walking with God means refusing certain shortcuts that could fatten a ledger or boost reputation. Neighbors notice Enoch doesn't push like the others. He doesn't clap for the cruel joke. His anger, when it appears, arrives clean and leaves quickly. Therefore, some call him soft. But soft is not the word, steady is. Steady enough to tell his son the truth about power, that it exists to serve, not devour. Steady enough to confess when he fails, because confession keeps the walk honest and the house light. Parenthood also reorders Enoch's imagination about time. Lifespans still stretch like roads without horizons, but Methuselah's growth measures the seasons. First tooth, first word, first scrape, first chore. Therefore, delay loses its charm, but urgency, if untethered, becomes panic. Enoch cultivates what Hebrews later names faith, that God exists and rewards those who seek him not with trophies, but with himself. In the seeking, Enoch discovers that God's presence dignifies diapers and door frames, not just altars and mountaintops. At night, when the house is finally quiet, Enoch remembers his own father's patterns and the inherited stories of Cain's city, how songs can train a heart toward vengeance or toward mercy. Therefore, he writes new songs for his household, simple refrains about justice, humility, kindness. They're not liturgical masterpieces, but children remember what's sung at bedtime. The melodies braid with chores and holidays until the household walks in a shared cadence. This is how ordinary love becomes holy practice. We aren't told the details of Methuselah's temperament, whether he was serene or spirited. But every parent learns this: your child will expose your blind spots. Enoch's blind spot is not spectacular sin, it's subtle drift. Therefore, he builds two guardrails. First, community-trusted friends who can say, "You're speeding." Second, Sabbath one day that refuses the cult of productivity and teaches the house to rest in God's care. But guardrails are not guarantees. They are helps. Enoch still chooses step by step to match the stride of the one who walks with him. Translate this to our century. A child arrives, or a responsibility that functions like one, an aging parent, a team you lead, a classroom. Your calendar explodes. Therefore, you're tempted to postpone soul care until life settles down. But life rarely settles. The Enoch way is not to add religious weight to an already heavy week. It is to lace the week with presence, a whispered prayer at the sink, truth-telling in emails, generosity in invoices, forgiveness in traffic, a phone left face down during dinner because love listens with eyes. Ordinary steps repeated become a road. The city Enoch inhabits keeps glorifying speed and spectacle. Yet somewhere a father and son walk the same path home at sunset, two shadows stretching along the wall, one larger one trying to match. Therefore, the lesson writes itself in the dust formation, happens at the pace of walking. But the pace is not lonely. God is the third shadow, unseen and real, teaching cadence the way a patient friend teaches you to breathe through a hill. By the time Methuselah grows tall, Enoch has changed. Not into a monk hidden from markets, but into a man who moves through them differently. His strength is quieter, his anger cleaner, his joy less fragile because it no longer depends on applause. Therefore, his house becomes a small refuge in a loud neighborhood. But refuge is not retreat. It is a staging ground for love bread, shared with the hungry fairness at the gate prayers that name enemies and ask for their good. This is the formation of a walker, one step, then another, until the steps become a life. Fatherhood didn't make Enoch magical. It made him intentional. He turned ordinary thresholds, doorframes, coins, conflicts into micro-liturgies that trained a steady walk with God. Do the small, faithful things repeatedly and let them form you. If Enoch's secret isn't spectacle, it must be something you could practice on a Tuesday. Scripture's metaphor gives us the map walk. Not drift, not sprint, walk. Therefore, the question becomes practical. What are the elements of a biblical walk? The canon keeps returning to three threads that braid into one chord: presence, direction, and pace. Cf. Genealogy 5:22, Mike 6:8, Amos 3:3, Gal 5:25. Miss one in the chord phrase. Presence is the who. Think about strolling with a friend. You don't perform, you attend. You are with them, not just near them. Biblically, presence means a practiced attentiveness to God, acknowledging Him in the middle of real tasks. Proverbs 3:6. Letting prayer be oxygen rather than an event. Therefore, anxiety loosens because you are accompanied. But presence without obedience curdles into sentimentality. If you won't alter your choices when God speaks, you're not walking, you're loitering. Direction is the where. Micah compresses it into three moves: do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. 6:8. Justice aims your steps toward the good of others, especially the vulnerable. Mercy carries compassion into costly action. Humility keeps your center of gravity with God instead of ego. Therefore, confusion shrinks because the path is not random. But direction without presence becomes dry moralism map reading without the guide. Pace is the how. God's cadence is neither frantic nor lazy. Jesus embodies unhurried urgency. He arrives on time even when others call him late. John 11. He withdraws to pray when crowds demand more. Mark 1:35. He finishes his work without hurry. Shame. John 17. 4. Therefore, burnout decreases because you refuse to worship speed. But pace without direction decays into vague chill, and pace without presence becomes self-help minimalism. Enoch's walk threads all three. So how would a day look when presence, direction, and pace cooperate? Imagine an ordinary Tuesday. You wake before picking up your phone. You pick up awareness. A breath prayer names reality. You are here. I am yours. Presence. You review two choices you'll likely face: an email where truth is costly, a meeting where a quieter colleague gets bulldozed. Direction, justice, and mercy will shape your response. You sketch a sane schedule with margins for interruptions. Pace. Therefore, your day begins aimed and accompanied. But the real test is not at dawn. It's at disruption. By 10 a.m., the interruption arrives. A client demands a discount with a threat. A co-worker rolls their eyes in front of the team. You discover a mistake you made that no one has noticed yet. Your heart rate spikes. Here the walk becomes visible. Presence. Lord, help. Direction. What does justice require? What does mercy look like? What confession belongs to me? Pace. Resist the adrenaline that wants to sprint you into overreaction. Therefore, the walk expresses itself in a choice: clean truth instead of spin advocacy for the bulldozed colleague, repentance for the missed detail. These are not heroic acts. They are faithful steps. Afternoon fatigue hums. Presence keeps you tethered through short, recentering prayers, a verse taped near your screen, or a 2-minute silence in the car before school pickup. Direction keeps you from weaponizing weariness against your family. Pace reminds you that love takes time. Therefore, you surprise yourself by listening longer than you feel like, by blessing rather than broadcasting your stress. Enoch's secret is not inaccessible mysticism. It is accessible repetition. But what about big guidance, someone asks? How do I know God's will for my career, my marriage, this crossroads? Direction at scale usually comes to walkers, not to statues. As you walk in, revealed things. Justice, mercy, humility, discernment for unrevealed things sharpens. Psalm 25 describes it this way: God teaches the humble his way. Therefore, don't pause your walk waiting for fireworks. But don't rush into decisions your soul cannot carry. Let presence set pace, pray. Seek counsel, test motives, move one step at a time. 2 cautions. First, beware religious busyness masquerading as presence. If your schedule is packed with spiritual activities, but your co-workers experience you as harsh, the cord has split. Second, beware private spirituality that never generates justice. If your walk with God doesn't alter invoices, arguments, and how you treat inconvenient people, it's a scenic loop back to self. Enoch's walk would have touched markets and neighbors, or the Bible wouldn't bother telling us he walked with God, the God who loves the world he made. For viewers who fear failing at this, the walk assumes stumbles. If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. Gal. 5-25. Keeping in step is a practice, not perfection. Therefore, confession is part of the rhythm. When you speed or stall, you return to presence. I'm here again, Lord. You re-aim direction. What is the right next right thing, and you rematch pace. Teach me to move without panic or sloth. Over time, these repetitions turn into muscle memory. And like Enoch, you discover the quiet miracle intimacy strong enough to rewrite fear. Enoch's sentence is short because his life was steady, not because it was small. He apprenticed his ordinary to God's company. He let presence anchor identity, direction, clarify integrity, and pace, protect humanity. Therefore, the genealogy blinks, and death's period becomes a comma. God lifts into a new clause. That future belongs to God. Today belongs to your walk. To walk with God is to braid presence with God. Direction, justice, mercy, humility, and pace unhurried urgency into ordinary days. Miss one, and you drift. Practice all 3 repeatedly, and your life learns Enoch's steady miracle. If Genesis tells us that Enoch walked, Hebrews tells us how that walk is understood from the inside. The writer looks back across centuries and chooses just a few sharp lines. Enoch was taken so that he did not see death, and before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. Therefore, the question shifts from biography to engine room. What is the inner fuel of a life that moves God's heart? But modern ears often translate faith into mental assent or motivational mist. Hebrews refuses both. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. The text continues, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Therefore, faith has contour reality. God is character. God is good towards seekers, and movement seek. But reduce faith to agreement on a doctrinal line, and you get a statue correctly shaped, unmoving. The writer imagines a walker. Faith is not merely what you think about God in a survey. It is how you step toward God on a Monday when costs are real. Start with reality. Believe that he exists sounds basic until the moment your day suggests otherwise. Deadlines roar like little gods. Budgets threaten. Headlines jeer. Therefore, the practical atheism of hurry pressures you to act as if you are alone. But Enoch's walk says, no God is here. Presence is never imaginary politeness. It is the most reasonable reading of a world held together by someone. This is not blind optimism. It is clear-eyed confidence that you are accompanied in both famine and feast. Move to character. He rewards those who seek him, not those who use him, not those who perform flawlessly, but seekers fallible, persistent, relational. Therefore, reward language must be re-aimed away from vending machine religion, but neither should we dilute it into vague vibes. The rewarder gives rewards that fit his nature, himself first, peace that relocates your fear, wisdom that slows your panic, courage that makes justice possible, joy sturdy enough for grief. Gifts come, yes, but the giver is the gift that interprets every other one. Then, movement seeking. The verb refuses passivity. Faith is a direction, not a feeling. Therefore, Enoch's life can be summarized as a long obedience. born from a long desire. But desire without practices evaporates under heat. Seekers build habits that keep their desire hydrated. Words with God in the morning, truth in transactions, mercy at the gate, rest one day, in 7 confession, quick and clean. Not as merit points, but as paths where presence is easier to notice. Let's make this concrete. You face a dilemma, say nothing, while a coworker gets sidelined, or speak up and risk your standing. Reality. God exists, sees and cares about the lowly. Character God is the rewarder. Walking his way is never wasted, even if applause doesn't arrive. Movement, you seek him. Pray briefly, ask for clean motives, then advocate with courage and gentleness. Therefore, faith steps into the meeting, but it releases outcomes. You trust the rewarder with results you cannot control, or take a private moment. You can shave a corner off an invoice and no one will know. Reality. God is here. Character. His rewards include integrity that sleeps well. Movement, you choose honesty. Therefore you may lose a small gain, but you gain something not for sale, an unfractured soul. Hebrews names this pleasure, the Father commends walkers. Commendation is not clout. It is the smile of the one Enoch cared about most. How do I grow this kind of faith? Well, by clenching harder. Faith grows by looking. The chapter's drumbeat is by faith. By faith, by faith, and the melody under it is the character of God on display. Therefore, the most efficient way to expand faith is to feed your vision of who God is. Steady, holy, near, generous. But vision must be paired with motion, or it calcifies. Start small. 1 act of justice, 1 hour of Sabbath, 1 confession you've postponed. Watch the rewarder meet you, not always with fireworks, often with quiet strength. 2 myths to retire. First, that faith is certainty about outcomes. Hebrews doesn't say Enoch knew the logistics of his exit. It says he knew God. Therefore you can walk in thick fog with thin fear if the hand you hold is trustworthy. But trying to guarantee outcomes will exhaust you. Second, that faith always feels thrilling. Often it feels like showing up and staying kind. Enoch wasn't a headline, he was consistency over decades. Heaven called that pleasing. Now bring this back to pace. Seekers do not sprint to prove themselves. They walk to stay close. Therefore you can reject the hurry shame that tells you you're late to spiritual maturity. But you also reject the drift lie that tells you tomorrow is fine. Faith chooses today. 5 quiet minutes. 1 courageous email. An apology before the sun sets. This is not small. It is Enoch-sized, which is to say God-sized in God's time. Here is the promise tucked inside Hebrews the rewarder notices. When no one claps, when algorithms overlook you, when your best work is invisible to everyone but your household and your Lord he sees. Therefore hidden faithfulness is not wasted. But it will always be contested by hurry cynicism and the itch to be impressive. Keep seeking. Keep walking. There will be a day when God's commendation becomes the only review that matters, and his smile will feel like home. Hebrews reframes Enoch from mystery to method. Faith believes God is real, trusts he is good to seekers, and moves toward him in ordinary choices. Don't chase certainty about outcomes. Seek the rewarder and walk. There's a moment in the New Testament when a quiet walker suddenly speaks. Jude, warning a fracturing church, reaches back across millennia and writes Enoch prophesied saying, Jude 14-15. Therefore Enoch is not only a model of nearness, he becomes a voice. But we must handle that voice carefully, because Jude alludes to material many traditions don't treat as Scripture. 1 Enoch. Across Christian families, the status of that literature differs. Our approach honored Jude's inspired point, while being clear about sources. The ethical thrust is canonical. The citation background is debated. What is Jude doing? He's confronting teachers who use religion to excuse predation. Big talkers, small character. Therefore he calls the church to sobriety. God sees injustice and will judge it. But Jude doesn't disciple us into rage. He disciples us into clarity and perseverance. In that light, Enoch functions as an ancient witness, saying, "You are not crazy to name evil evil." It's a comfort to tender consciences who fear that mercy means silence. Mercy does not erase accountability. It insists on it. Now connect this to Enoch's walk. Prophetic speech without a holy life corrodes. A holy life without truthful speech shrinks back when neighbors need protection. Enoch integrates both. Therefore his voice as used by Jude and his walk as shown in Genesis form one picture presence with God creates courage before people. But courage is not cruelty. The goal is not to win arguments. It is to love truth and neighbor in the same breath. Think of the marketplace scenario. Weights are rigged, widows are cheated, flattery oils the gears. The walker says, "This is wrong," and lives a fairer way. Across traditions, here's a respectful cross-denominational path. We affirm. For Jude is Scripture. 2. His ethical warning is clear. 3. Using well-known literature of the time to make a point does not require making that literature canonical for all churches. Therefore, we can receive Jude's pastoral intent without importing a shelf of speculation. But we also won't sneer at brothers and sisters who study Warren Enoch historically. The uniting center is this: God opposes arrogant harm, and near walkers join his opposition with clean hands and steady hearts. So how does this land on Tuesday? You see a pattern of harm where you work a manager who humiliates a system that quietly excludes. Presence, Lord, what is faithful direction, justice and mercy? Pace, unhurried courage. Therefore you document, you advocate, you create cover for the vulnerable. You refuse gossip as activism in favor of truthful process. But you also guard your own soul. Indignation can become addiction. Enoch's way is to keep outrage bounded by prayer, facts, and love. That boundary lets your words heal rather than scorch. One more angle: prophetic work in the digital age. Speed rewards hot takes. Slowness looks like weakness. Therefore, we're tempted to perform righteousness for an audience. But performative prophecy burns out communities and the prophet. A walker's voice sounds different, fewer adjectives, more specificity receipts instead of rumors. Confessions where we've contributed to the mess. Jude's church needed that kind of sturdy speech. So do we. You don't have to become a professional critic. You have to become truthful and brave. Return to Enoch's legacy. If his name interrupts the genealogy, Jude's citation interrupts our temptation to equate niceness with holiness. Holiness is tenderness and truthfulness married. Therefore, some of us need to speak when we'd rather stay silent, but others need to soften when we'd rather scorch. The walk teaches which is which, because the walker beside you will nudge, here speak, or here wait. Intimacy forms discernment. Let's honor the pastoral center. God will address harm. That certainty frees you from theatrical fury, because justice is not your solo project. It also frees you from despair, because tomorrow is not owned by liars. Keep walking. When words are needed, let them be clean, specific, humble, and courageous, the kind of words a person could pray and then still sleep after. If Enoch's life was intimacy stronger than death, his voice in Jude is integrity stronger than spin. Our world could use both. Jude uses Enoch to remind the church. God sees arrogant harm and will judge it. Walkers speak with clean courage, truthful, specific, humble, while staying close to God so their fire becomes light, not wildfire. If Enoch's life teaches us the what, Micro-Liturgies teach us the how. Not grand gestures, not spiritual marathons, small repeatable acts that braid presence direction and pace into ordinary minutes. Therefore, transformation becomes probable, because it is practical. But legalism lurks if we forget that practices are paths to a person, not points scored. We're building rhythms that keep you near honest and human in a loud age. 1. Threshold prayers, door frames and logins. Every doorway, every app sign-in becomes a tiny altar. Hand on the jam or trackpad, here I serve. Keep me clean and kind. Therefore your day starts aimed. But if you miss one, you don't owe God a quota, just resume the walk at the next threshold. 2. First truth, not first scroll. Before feeds face God, a breath prayer, a psalm line, 2 minutes of silence. Therefore algorithms don't set your appetite. But rigidity kills joy if the baby cries pray while pouring milk. 3. Just waits at work. Choose honesty where it costs. Invoices, estimates, credit citations. Therefore integrity accumulates like compound interest. But you will be tempted to round. Name the pull. Choose clean math. 4. Mercy in conflict. When anger spikes, delay, response, breathe. Pray, write a draft you never send. Therefore words start healing instead of scoring. But mercy is not mush. Say hard things without hard edges. 5. The 3 gratitude. 3 gratitudes at lunch, 3 at night, specific, not vague. Therefore scarcity loses the mic. But you don't fake it on brutal days. Thank God for survival and for the next right step. 6. The unseen blessing. Pick one invisible good each day, restock the office coffee, pick up trash. Send an encouragement no one will repost. Therefore your soul learns to love anonymity, but don't weaponize it to avoid needed credit for teammates. Humility isn't hiding, it's right-sizing. 7. Sabbath resistance. One day weekly, cease producing delight in God, people, and creation. Therefore you learn you are held, not held together by hustle, but Sabbath without justice is cosplay. Let your rest overflow into generosity. 8. Confession before sunset. Keep short accounts with God and people. Therefore shame loses its nesting place. But don't confess to dump your anxiety on others. Repair where you harmed, not where it's convenient. 9. Embodied prayer walks. 15 minutes at dusk, move your body, name your neighbors, ask for their good. Therefore place becomes parish, but prayer is not surveillance. Bless, don't snoop. 10. The phone face down rule. In meals and meetings where love should listen, pocket the screen. Therefore people regain weight in your attention. But be honest about emergencies. Presence thrives on clarity, not performance. Notice the pattern, tiny, transferable, tethered to real life. These aren't heroic, they're human. They touch money, speech, anger, time, tech, and attention where faith usually leaks. Over weeks, these stitches hold. Over months, they shape desire. Over years, they rewrite reflexes. Therefore, holiness becomes recognizable as emotional health, plus moral courage rooted in God's nearness, but expect resistance from hurry outside and from pride inside. Won't this get stale? Only if you worship novelty. Relationships thrive on repeated kindness. Commuters take the same street because it leads home. Micro-Liturgies are homing beacons. When you drift, they call you back. Don't measure success by fireworks. Measure by fidelity. Did you return after you forgot? Did you repair after you failed? Did you bless when no one watched? That's Enoch's country. What about families and teams? Translate these practices into shared rhythms without turning your house into a monastery. A simple liturgy at the table. Today I saw, I'm thankful for, I'm sorry for, I will try. At work, start the week with a fairness check, any invoices to correct any credit, to share any conflicts, to address privately before they metastasize publicly. Therefore the walk scales from personal to communal. But keep consent central. Imposed piety breeds rebellion. Finally, joy. If your practices shrink your smile, you built a cage, not a path. The rewarder delights to meet seekers in ordinary places, a doorway, a spreadsheet, a sidewalk, a table. Therefore watch for small arrivals, peace where panic once ruled courage, where you used to placate patience, where sarcasm used to win. These are the miracles that don't trend, but do endure. Enoch's walk was made of days like this, unfamous and unforgettable to God. Micro-Liturgies are small, repeatable choices that keep you near God in real life. Threshold prayers, honest math, delayed anger, weekly rest, quick confession, attentive presence. They're not points to win, they're paths to walk. Picture two men walking the same streets, under the same sun. One writes a song about vengeance, Genealogy 4:23-24. The other writes a life about nearness, Genealogy 5:21-24. Therefore the city hears two rhythms at once, but only one rhythm heals. Lamech turns injury into theater violence performed with a chorus behind it. Enoch turns ordinary days into worship faithfulness performed for an audience of one. Same markets, different music. Same opportunities, different outcomes that echo for generations. Lamech's song is catchy because it promises control. They hit me, I'll hit harder. Therefore fear learns to wear swagger, but swagger is just fear with louder boots. Homes organized around retaliation become tense museums where everyone tiptoes past explosive pride. Enoch's walk is quieter. He refuses the thrill of escalation, chooses clean truth over sharp triumphs, and keeps mercy near. Therefore his house loosens the air, easier to breathe, the table safer for confession. One path multiplies weapons, the other multiplies welcome. The contrast shows up in money, romance, and reputation. Lamech stacks advantage, many wives, louder, boasts taller fences. Therefore neighbors become instruments, but instruments don't love you back. Enoch treats people as image bearers, not utilities. He practices just weights, slow anger, Sabbath resistance. Therefore relationships deepen even when prophets don't. Reputation arrives the long way through consistency, not spectacle. You can feel which neighborhood you'd rather raise a child in, the one humming with threat or the one humming with trust. This isn't ancient caricature, it's Monday at the office. Two leaders face pressure. Leader L flexes public blame, private panic. Therefore the team shrinks into survival. But metrics look shiny for a quarter. Leader E walks names. Reality protects the vulnerable, tells the truth without theatrics. Therefore the team exhales and creates. Over time the songs diverge. One organization grows brittle and brilliant at spin. The other grows durable and honest about limits. Genesis places Enoch beside Lamech to say culture is a choir. Choose your conductor, and then there's legacy. Lamech's lyrics travel fast and fade. Enoch's steps travel slow and last. Therefore one man's music gets applause, but the other man's walk gets God. Generations later, Hebrews won't quote Lamech. It will commend Enoch. That isn't accidental curation, it's a scoreboard recalibration. Heaven keeps different stats. The lives that look quiet from the stands can be deafening up close to God. Which is why the text bothers to put these men on adjacent pages, to let you hear your options while you still get to choose. So ask the question that matters: which song is training your reflexes? The vengeance aria dressed as boundary setting, the hustle anthem dressed as prudence, or the Enoch hymn presence, justice, mercy, humility played in a key your household can actually sing. Therefore audit your liturgies, the shows you stream, the jokes you reward, the stories you retell at dinner. But don't drown in shame. Switch playlists. Teach your body a new rhythm. Begin with one person to bless, one place to be fair, one conflict to handle without flair. Here's the hope buried in the contrast. You don't have to become a different person overnight. You have to change songs mid-step. Enoch proves it's possible. In a world that celebrates louder, he walked nearer. Therefore, the choice on your street is not ancient, it's current. Will your house rehearse threats or rehearse grace? Will your team celebrate domination or celebrate repair? Two paths, two songs. Pick the one that sounds like home when God hums along. Lamech sings retaliation. Enoch walks nearness. One builds fear and spin, the other builds trust and presence. In your money conflicts and leadership, switch the soundtrack, choose the Enoch song, and walk it. Some days end like any other, shadows lengthen, tools cool, the street exhales. Imagine Enoch on such a day. No trumpets, no storm split. A man who has practiced nearness takes another step, and the step keeps going. Therefore, the most astonishing line in Genesis lands without spectacle. He was not, for God took him, Genealogy 5:24. But Scripture refuses camera angles because the point isn't the mechanics. The point is the relationship that made the mechanics make sense. We are curious creatures. We want details. Was there a witness? Did his cloak fall? Is there a footprint that stops mid-dust? Therefore, it's tempting to build lore, but the text protects us from missing the meaning. Enoch's exit is the natural extension of his life, nearness strong enough to shrink the terror of death. Hebrews says he did not see death and was commended as having pleased God. The commendation came before the exit. The exit was grace, not a prize for perfection. Think of a lantern carried from one room to another. Same flame, different space. That's the metaphor Genesis invites. Enoch's walk is already lit by presence. Therefore, crossing the threshold is less a vanishing act than a continuation. But continuation does not erase ache. A household looks for a father who doesn't come home. A son stands at the gate until the horizon gives up its last color. Mystery consoles and wounds. Faith holds both awe at what God has done, lament for what we cannot hug. Why does this matter to us? Because death still sounds like the final drumbeat, and fear still tries to choreograph our days. Enoch's story does not offer control, it offers company. Therefore, hope becomes livable. Now you can walk today with the one who will meet you at your last threshold. But do not wait for miracles to dignify your life. The miracle is the walk, the steady, ordinary Godward nearness that makes you more human, not less. Enoch's quiet ending is not an escape hatch for elites. It is a signpost intimacy wins. The Bible gives no spectacle for Enoch's exit on purpose. The meaning is the walk. Practice nearness now, and let God decide the details of the threshold. The miracle isn't how you disappear. It's how you live. When a life ends strangely, the neighborhood talks for a week. When a life is lived steadily, the neighborhood changes for a generation. Enoch is gone. Therefore, the question shifts from one man's walk to its wake. But wakes can be noisy without being transformative. Legacy isn't the rumors you leave. It's the reflexes you train in those who outlive you. The genealogy keeps moving Methuselah, Lamech, the father of Noah, then Noah himself, Genealogy 5:25-32, 6 and 8-9. Somewhere in that slow river, Enoch's cadence keeps rippling. Imagine Methuselah as a boy, trailing his father at dusk, matching steps along the wall. Therefore, the shape of Enoch's walk becomes embodied memory. But memory can fade unless it is practiced. Methuselah grows old, very old, and passes along stories and habits, just waits, quiet anger, Sabbath joy, confession that keeps houses light. Across centuries, that kind of formation can feel too small to matter. Yet Noah appears with a familiar description, a righteous man, who walked with God. The echo is not accident. Seed steps bear fruit in far fields. Do not romanticize the timeline. Violence multiplies, corruption spreads, Genealogy 6:11. Therefore, Enoch's legacy does not cancel cultural decay, but it preserves a lineage capable of hearing God when the world can't. Noah receives an impossible assignment. He is not superhuman, he is formed. The planks he drives into the ark are the same moral timber his great-grandfather drove into his day's presence direction pace. When judgment and mercy interlace, a prepared man meets a prepared moment. Picture the workshop resin smoke in the air, mallets, thudding neighbors heckling. Therefore, perseverance needs a backstory. But backstories aren't built in crises. They're built in kitchens and courtyards, in how a father speaks when cheated, in how a mother prays when afraid. Noah's courage is not spontaneous combustion. It's Enoch's ordinary obedience, kiln-fired across generations, now glowing when the storm gathers. Legacy can sour into nostalgia if it worships the past. Enoch's legacy bends toward the future, a walk reproducible under new pressures. Therefore ask which practices in your house are portable. Which can your kids carry to a dorm, a deployment, a new city? But beware turning your rhythms into rigid rules that choke joy. Pass down living paths, not museum pieces, threshold prayers, honest math confession before sunset Sabbath that tastes like delight. You won't control your descendants' decisions. Enoch didn't script Noah. He crafted soil where faith could take root. Therefore measure legacy by formation, not fame. But don't despise small signals, shared blessings at the table, a grandchild who apologizes quickly, a team that tells the truth when a deal could hide fraud. These are floodwood moments, quiet beams that hold weight when waters rise. Finally bring it home. Write a 2-line family rule of life. We walk with God. We do justice with mercy humbly. Tape it by the door. Therefore exits and entries become catechisms. But let grace have the last word when you fail it. Tell stories of the walkers who formed you. A grandmother's prayer, a mentor's honesty, a friend's patient pace, and let those stories tune the room like a guitar before a song. Enoch disappears into God's nearness, and the world keeps burning. Yet through Methuselah to Noah, a counter-melody survives. Therefore, your quiet faithfulness today may become someone else's courage tomorrow. But you won't get to schedule the moment it's needed. Walk anyway. Seed the reflex. Trust the rewarder to bring harvest in his time. Enoch's walk didn't stop with his exit. It seeded a lineage that could still hear God. Build a legacy of reflexes, presence, justice, mercy, humility. So your people are ready when their moment comes. If Enoch's world ran on violence and delay, ours runs on velocity and distraction. Therefore the walk must be portable, able to live in apartments and buses, slack threads and school pickup lines. But portable doesn't mean shallow. This field guide translates presence, direction, and pace into patterns a modern life can carry without breaking. 1. Start with a 2-line rule of life. Write it, post it, live it. We walk with God. We do justice with mercy humbly. Therefore choices have a north, but rules without relationship calcify. Rehearse it with God each morning like a handshake, not a slogan. 2. Design a sane morning. 10 unhurried minutes, silence a short psalm or prayer preview. 2 likely tests, truth where it costs, mercy where it's hard. Therefore your soul clocks in before your body, but perfectionism kills consistency. If you oversleep, give God the first available 5 minutes, not tomorrow's ideal 30. 3. Put justice on your calendar. A weekly block for 1 concrete good mentoring groceries for a neighbor advocacy email you've postponed. Therefore, compassion becomes logistics. But activism without love curdles. Pair action with prayer for the people you serve. 4. Pace your week with rest. One day that tells hustle it is not your master. Delight in God and His gifts, food, friends, creation naps. Therefore, your identity detaches from output. But rest that never spills into generosity becomes cosplay. Let Sabbath make you kinder on Monday. 5. Treat tech like fire. It warms and it burns. Curate notifications, set no phone zones, table bed prayer, and practice first truth, not first scroll. Therefore, attention becomes worship, not withdrawal. But rigidity makes Pharisees. Adjust settings with love, not shame. 6. Keep short accounts. Daily confession with God, prompt repair with people. Therefore, shame loses its burrow, but confession that dodges restitution is theater. Where possible, fix what you broke. 7. Choose a companion practice. Walking prayer journaling, fixed hour prayer, or a simple exam at night. Where did I notice you? Where did I resist you? Therefore, presence becomes traceable, but don't turn the tool into the treasure. If a practice stops helping, trade it, not him. 8. Build a small circle. 2 or 3 friends who can say you're speeding or you're hiding. Share wins, losses, and one specific obedience you'll attempt this week. Therefore, perseverance gets shoulders, but secrecy starves growth. Tell the truth kindly, receive the truth bravely. Expect resistance. Hurry will sneer. Algorithms will beckon. Pride will itch. Therefore, begin embarrassingly small 5 minutes of quiet. 1 fair invoice, 1 merciful reply, 1 neighbor blessed, 1 day rested, 1 apology made. But celebrate progress out loud. Joy is fuel. Enoch's mystery lives behind us. Our Mondays live in front of us. The invitation is not to reproduce his exit, but to apprentice to his way, seeking the rewarder, step by ordinary step, until intimacy rewrites fear. In a world on fire, walkers become shade. Be shade on your street. Make the walk portable, a 2-line rule of life. 10 quiet minutes scheduled, justice weekly, rest-wise, tech short accounts. 1 companion practice and a small circle. Start tiny. Repeat. Let presence, direction, and pace turn your week into worship.